In order to store information and to make use of it during the interaction, humans have a memory. And this memory has to store a considerable amount of information. Depending on what input channels we have, the amount of information varies between a couple of kilobytes to 1 gigabyte for the visual perception per hour. And if you sum that up for the lifetime of a human, you easily end up with terabytes of data. In order to store this data, the data is not organized in terms of raw data, but in terms of objects. And this happens in a hierarchical manner in the human memory system. Actually, the human memory consists of 3 layers. On the first layer, we have the sensory memory, which stores information for a couple of milliseconds to several seconds. This sensory memory is modality specific, that we have an iconographic or an echoic sensory memory. If you want to store the information for longer times, then it needs to be transited to the next step, which is the working memory or the short-term memory. The short-term memory can store information for up to 20 or 45 seconds, and it organizes the information in terms of chunks or pieces of information, and the capacity of this working memory is thought to be around 7 plus minus 2 chunks of information, where that is stated in a popular article by Miller from 1956. In this working memory, there are different models which try to explain this, and one popular model is the one from Baddeley and Hitch, which states that the information in this working memory is also organized modality specifically. So we have a phonologic loop, which is able to carry linguistic information, which might be coming, for example, from listening to speech or from reading a text. And there is the visual spatial notepad, and there is the episodic buffer. And all 3 are organized by a central executive unit. Now, it may come to an overflow of information if there is too much information in one of these blocks on the left-hand side. For example, if you listen to speech and at the same time read a text, then both pieces of information would go into the phonologic loop, and then they are overlaid and you might not make sense out of that information anymore. So it's better to combine different memory parts, like, for example, as I'm doing in this film, you listen to my speech, which goes into your phonologic loop, and you view the illustrations behind me, which go to the visual spatial notepad. So it's better to distribute the information over different pieces of this working memory. And then, if you want to store information for longer times, it needs to go into the long-term memory. The transfer from the working memory to the long-term memory works only by repetition and by learning. And this is a central part of the learning process, that you need to repeat information in order to get it into your long-term memory. The access to the information is slower in the working memory, but it has a much larger storage capacity. In fact, there is no theoretical capacity limit, but still there is the possibility that information drops out of this long-term memory by forgetting processes. And these forgetting processes work via interferences with content learned earlier or later in your lifetime history. In this long-term memory, information is not stored as separate information items, but in a context. For example, you might remember situations which were important to you, and then by remembering situation, you might remember people who have been present in this situation. You might remember the time, the place where it happened, and so on. You might remember more details starting from the context. That is, a popular organization of information in this long-term memory is via a context or via a situation.